Hello and welcome back to the Strata Conference. I'm Alex Howard of O'Reilly Media, and we are here to talk about data privacy and, of all things, food science with Jim Adler, who is the Chief Privacy Officer of Intelius. So Jim, what's the story with how food science and food data is sort of giving us some insight into where privacy regulation is going?
Well, I started to look at food policy over the last 130 years or so, and I found, I'm an old electrical engineering guy, and if you plot them out, and I just did a talk where I have this plot that really shows sort of a sine wave of food policy leading privacy policy, almost like current in a capacitor leads the voltage, right? And I said, wow, this looks interesting. So I started to look at the critical elements in food policy, and I sort of defined this political heat to light ratio, where the political heat really starts increasing and there's not enough science to really support it, you tend to get more anxiety and therefore more movement toward legislation. I call it sort of the conservation of negative energy, right? That negative energy must go somewhere. And so you look at food policy culminating with the 1906 Pure Food Act, and that came out of the snake oil era of the 19th century. And then things really quieted down until after World War II, when you had all these hearings around what constitutes real peanut butter, and then they kind of stepped back and said, well, let's just put the percentage of peanuts on the label and let the consumer decide. And then things quieted down a bit. And there was some real values to be gleaned from that. One is prescription doesn't really work. Often transparency does. And so you look at privacy policy, and the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, typically regulates privacy, and they're big. Where heat to light really peaked, I would argue, for privacy reasons, was in the 70s, and the culmination of the late 60s civil rights era culminated with the Fair Credit Reporting Act of 1970, and then things kind of cooled down until now, where they're starting to heat up again, and so the question is, why is that happening? And the lesson I've taken from it is that there's really not enough transparency about the data that's out there about us, what inferences people are drawing from this public data. And so we need to have more transparency, more awareness, and give people more control about the data that's out there. And so my company has been doing just that and giving people more awareness and availability to the public data that's out there.
Now, the way that's expressed to the end user, if I go out to buy peanut butter, I can actually look in the side of it now, and I see nutrition labeling, and I can go to various things. You can see fat composition of various ingredients. Is there a possible analog with privacy? Can you imagine there being a privacy label for a social network or for a mobile phone or for any other thing like that?
Well, I take a little bit of a different view of it. I think, and there's been a lot of discussion about this, is if you're not paying for the product, you are the product, right? We've heard that
line
out there.
Resonates.
Right? And so the question is, well, if I'm the product, what kind of product am I? And so what kind of information is being gleaned about me? It might be being monetized, but it might not. And so I think what's important is that we understand what information's out there. And so Intelius, we are sort of at the end of the data supply chain. You can't come to Intelius and buy a list. We sell reports one at a time. We just came out with this product called TrueRep that, for free, gives you a glimpse into your own background and the public information that's out there about you, so you can see your own label. What is my address history? What do any court records look like? And you have real privacy controls around some of the more sensitive information. Like, for example, you can knock out your latest contact information. That feature actually came out of some of the discussions we've had with some real privacy advocates in the domestic violence arena that came to us and said it would be really nice if you could delete off your network the most sensitive pieces of data, which for victims of domestic violence typically is their latest address and phone. And so we thought that was such a great idea. Now all customers of TrueRep can have it, and now they can have it for free. So I think this awareness, as soon as you have that awareness, it empowers a lot of control. And I think then our hope is that the anxiety would lessen, because then you would know what's out there. And if there is something objectionable, it gives you tools to take control of it.
So that actually is a perfect lead into the next question, which is, what does personal data ownership mean in 2011, right? There's this trend towards we call them the blue button in the health space, where people could download their health record potentially, and that's started just in the military side of the VA, and I think Aetna supporting it, and a couple others. But in the larger context, what does that mean? You've got some insight into giving people the ability to see what's out there. How important is it for people to care about it? If you were someone who doesn't understand as much about the digital world as you do.
I think there's two fundamental concepts people need to understand. One is, in a society, we build relationships based on what we know about each other, and there's great value in that. And so understanding what value you have in a society is commensurate with what people know about you. Do they trust you? Do they trust your background, what you've done in the past, right? And the second is, if you completely abdicate your position in society and your footprint in the public world, who is going to supplant that space? I mean, there's, especially in a very fine-grained sense, with the space around your name. If you have a very common name, if you cede that brand space to someone else, there's a guy who works for me, and there's 38 of him just in Seattle, 38 people with the exact same name. The chances that he is a victim of mistaken identity rises if he completely cedes his public footprint to someone else. If he can occupy that space and make sure that it's accurate, and make sure that it maintains a accurate reflection on him, I think that's the fundamental cornerstone of a great relationship.
So I nipped in and grabbed Facebook.com/Alex Howard when that became available, because I thought that was an important thing.
Yeah.
There are, in fact, many other Alex Howards out there.
Right,
but
you have a very common name.
Somewhat crowded out by the fact that I have a lot of social updates there. But it does bring into the context really of Facebook itself, right? 800 million users. They just announced a number of changes yesterday.
Yes. Yeah, I read about that.
One of which is this idea of a timeline, reshaping the profile, and a change for your social graph, as they say. So they have no longer just have nouns, now that you have verbs. You do things. So our grammar's changing a little bit. But so too is the way that the network itself is looking at your actions over time. It's no longer a matter of liking something, you do it and it gets added. So you can go back to what you just described and see how that might really change our relationships, and certainly the way that our friends relate to us in that context. As people look at this new trend there, and certainly there are a lot of people there, one thing that Mark Zuckerberg mentioned is for the first time last week, 500 million people logged on to Facebook in the same day. Quite a few of us.
That's a good number.
What should we be thinking about in the context of our privacy there, and how we conduct ourselves in a way that doesn't expose us in a negative way, and yet still allows us to reap some of the benefits of this new social layer?
I think that what people often struggle with is, when does the private space end and when does the public space begin? And with respect to your body, and you talked about healthcare earlier, or your home, it's very clear. The threshold of my doorway is where my home ends. And as soon as I step out, I am effectively in public. My body has even a more strict barrier and definition. Socially, it's always been mixed. And so, gossips and yentas and hearsay has been around forever, for millennia. I think whenever you tell someone something, you can expect that they will tell someone else. And so there is a gray area, and it gets back to trust. You tell people things in confidence that you don't expect them to spread, and if they prove themselves trustworthy, you bring them closer into your circle. And I think that nuance is what Facebook rightly is struggling with, and they should. It's difficult. It's nuanced. The human experiment is very textured. There was a case I often talk about, well-publicized, Ashley Payne down in Georgia, who went on vacation, put a picture of her drinking beer on her Facebook page. Someone shared that with the school board, and they fired her. And she said that it was as if someone came into my home and stole the pictures and put them on the internet. I would argue that's not really an accurate characterization. She got it about half right. No one broke into her home. She told a friend, a kind of a mouthy friend probably, and they shared that further.
Yep.
Where who was in the wrong here was the school board, who misused that information. Information does want to be free. There's no doubt. The question is, how do we use that information? And at some point, that use of information needs to have some eyes on it. When it hurts us deeply, like employment does, or housing, or other protected purposes, there needs to be a deeper set of mores and societal standards that we ascribe to. You're never going to get anybody from to stop sharing. I think that's one thing Zuckerberg's getting right, that there is going to be more and more sharing. But I think people are going to be more discriminating about who they share with, and we're going to see tighter circles around your own personal and more private information.
So the analogy is interesting between someone's public privacy and their digital one. It can be somewhat metaphorically explained by drawing the curtains. And I say that because I've had some discussions with people about what does it mean when you have your window open in your house. People can see in from out in public. Now, if a Google Street View car drives by and your window is open, public. If someone happens to be outside, even without binoculars, and can see something, you've allowed public view into your private space. So the analog tends to be on social networks, using the filters, using the controls, using circles, using whatever the different controls that exist are to stop that from happening. Accepting, however, that if you let someone into your house with a camera and they take a picture, then it's brought it out. So when companies look into this space, I don't think there's any question that a potential employer is going to look for you in Google and Facebook now, right? An HR person who doesn't, maybe not doing his or her job right. Potential date is certainly going to Google you at this point.
That's definitely true.
No question about it. But those are somewhat different concerns than balancing the sort of data mining and behavioral targeting with the privacy or ethical concerns that are out there right now. As you look out and see the very fast-changing landscape, how should the commercial benefit be weighed with the societal change, so to speak?
Well, I think you're really getting to this idea of when is inference appropriate, right? And I think inference is, especially talking about big data, right? There's a big data conference. You're bringing a lot of data together and you're inferring more than perhaps was in the raw data itself. And what's appropriate? And I think the consumer needs to be, and the user needs to be in that loop. I think that as customers make their own value proposition. Like if you're targeted, which sounds awful, the term sounds awful, but I'm getting value out of it. I'm saving money, I'm saving time, and I'm getting value out of it. I probably will like that.
Well, the happy word is personalized.
That's right. Sure. That's better than targeted. It's personalized. But I think at the end of the day, for this to really have legs long term, the customer has to feel, the user must feel that there is a value proposition for them. I think Facebook is going to go and is going through this. If people feel that they're getting enough value out of Facebook, and it's worth any private information gleaning and personalization or ad targeting that Facebook's doing, people will be fine with that. I did a post earlier in the year that said your privacy is worth $5 a month. And it really came to sort of looking at Facebook's market cap and sort of backing out what kind of revenue they would need. And they and just at that time, the market cap was much less, actually only 8-9 months ago, that they would need to either make that much money from you, $5 a month, either through advertising or charging. And I personally feel like if you had a choice to say either pay someone like Facebook $5 a month or be targeted for $5 a month worth of revenue to the company, would you do it? And I think you'd say, well, is this service worth that much? And you do the math. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. Maybe it's not as stark as pay me or get targeted, but I think the value proposition has to be such that users are okay with it, or else they'll just go elsewhere.
So, last question.
Sure.
And I think this goes to sort of where the privacy regulation and law space is shifting to. As a privacy officer, you have to watch these things pretty carefully. Do you think we're going to see any kind of baseline consumer or electronic privacy bill coming out of Congress this term, or do you think the FTC is going to really work on their own regulation in some way, move that forward?
I think you're going to see the FTC being a little bit more activist. I think you saw the paper that the staff report they put out earlier this year that talked about privacy by design and fair information privacy principles and enhanced transparency, those sorts of things. You're also seeing some movement on the Hill around homogenizing 46 state breach disclosure laws.
Yeah, national data breach laws.
That's right, which I think makes sense because you have 46 flavors of the same thing. And that's really tough for companies to figure out how to comply with. So I think you'll see that. I think you might see some activity around children and privacy.
COPPA.
That's right, COPPA enhancement. So I think that's where you might see some activity. I think this omnibus privacy bill, I think that often legislation is, of course, more of a hatchet than a scalpel, and you end up hurting opportunities. And I think a lot of the people that are at this conference are doing some amazing things. And to clip their wings and say, well, a priori, we're not going to let you do that, I think is really short-sighted. I think the right approach is to let this experiment run, take the data, look at the data, and see how we're evolving. Because I think there's always baby in bathwater, right? The question is it 50% baby, 50% bathwater, or 90% baby, 10% bathwater? And you're going to chuck away the whole thing? I think we have to figure out what that mix is, where the real harms are, and make sure that those harms are taken care of, which is why dialogues are so important, which is why I always say innovation is a team sport, and you have to listen to your toughest critics, because that dialogue is so important to innovating responsibly, and if you don't, Congress will.
Okay. That's a good place to end. All right. Great dialogue.
Yeah, terrific.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
okay.
Alex.
So that was Jim Adler, the Chief Privacy Officer of Intelius. You can follow him and his thoughts at Jim_Adler on Twitter, as I do. And you can dig in online and find that graph description around food regulation and privacy, I think, maybe through SlideShare or someplace like that.
Yeah, I'll put my slides up.
Great. So again, that was Jim Adler. We'll be back in about 10 minutes. I believe we're talking with Sarah Farmer from UN Global Pulse, speaking of using big data for good.